Championships. The thing that you absolutely need to be considered amongst motorsport fans to be considered one of the greatest of all time. Or do you? Throughout motorsport, there have been a raft of occasions where you look at a driver or rider in their discipline and you just think, how? How did they never do it? As despite the fact that they may have never won their title, they can still be considered one of the greatest. In fact, some of these guys in this video are assumed by a lot of people that they do in fact have one of these championships, whereas the reality is unfortunately otherwise. There's no real restrictions for who I'm putting in this video, and it's not listed either, so don't get overexcited in the comments please, although I know it's inevitable. Talking of drivers that are assumed to have a championship but don't, is Sir Stirling Moss, and if he wasn't an incredible sportsman, he wouldn't even be present in this video. Getting his first Grand Prix win at the 1955 British Grand Prix, he would lead home a Mercedes 1, 2, 3, 4. With Juan Manuel Fangio notably finishing behind him. On top of this, Fangio would be filled with praise for Moss, saying, "No, he was just better than me on that day." Following that up with victories at the Pescara Grand Prix in 1957, the longest circuit to ever hold a Formula 1 Grand Prix, being 3¼ minutes ahead of the closest driver, that being Fangio once again. Finishing the top 3 of the Formula 1 Championship a total of 7 times, 4 second places and 3 third places. The closest occasion was when he lost out to compatriot Mike Hawthorn at the Portuguese Grand Prix. Hawthorn was threatened with a penalty, perhaps even disqualification, for reversing his car after stalling on an uphill section of the Boa Vista circuit. And it was only from an argument from Moss himself against the stewards that kept Hawthorn's 6 points he got from that race intact. Eventually going on to beat Moss in the championship by a singular point, despite only winning 1 race to Stirling's 4. Talking of race wins, if we're going on to the more statistical side of things, despite there being far fewer races in the 50s and 60s, Moss still has the record for most Formula 1 championship wins without a championship, with 16. And then we compare that to total career wins across all disciplines, he would win 212 of the 529 races he would enter, or a win rate of just over 40%, an outrageous stat. In fact, despite multiple British champions following him, he would have the most wins for a British driver in Formula 1 until Nigel Mansell in 1991. The last thing we need to look at briefly is just the amount of competition he has taken part in, like the Mille Miglia, which he has won in 1955, completing with a 1,000-mile rally in just over 10 hours. You can also add the RAC Tourist Trophy, the Sebring 12 hours, the 1,000 kilometers of the Nürburgring 3 times, the Nassau Cup twice, a class win at the Le Mans 24 hours, 12 hours of Reims, as well as multiple land speed records at the Autodrome de Monterrey and Bonneville Salt Flats. So yeah, you can say he has quite the resume. I mean, just go on to his entry on Wikipedia and scroll down to the results. You actively have to search for results that aren't first, second or third. Then when we can consider other F1 drivers to never reach the ultimate success, like David Coulthard, Carlos Reutemann, Ronnie Peterson, Felipe Massa, Juan Pablo Montoya, Gilles Villeneuve, Jackie Hicks, Mark Webber, John Watson, Michele Alboreto, Bruce McLaren, Tony Brooks, I could keep going. But in my humble opinion, Sir Stirling Moss is almost certainly the best driver to compete in F1 that never got the championship. Going over to the land of the free, we have NASCAR, and I'll admit, before I wrote this video, I had to do quite a lot of my own research, but there were candidates that repeated in multiple articles incessantly, so upon looking at their career stats, I can see why. But for me, there is one driver that sticks out when you just wonder about how he's not a Cup Series champion yet. He still races in fact, and if you haven't figured that out by now, it's Denny Hamlin. If I was to make this video half a decade ago, the unfortunate moniker would have likely gone to Mark Martin, but Denny now clears every other driver in terms of wins by quite a way when you take out the championship winners. After competing in the Truck Series in 2004 for a handful of rounds, he would have his first full Busch Series, currently Xfinity Series, championship in 2005. Along with his first Cup Series rounds, finishing 5th in the Busch Series, he would also rack up 3 top 10 finishes in the 7 Cup Series rounds he would start, which, for a rookie, is definitely impressive. In 2006, he would be announced as a full-time driver for the number 11 car, a car he still occupies to this day. Some of the accolades he would acquire just from his rookie season would be finishing 3rd in the standings in just his first season, still the highest finish for any rookie in the modern NASCAR era, as well as sweeping both Cup Series races at Pocono, being only the 2nd rookie to do so since Jimmy Johnson did the same at Dover in 2002. As a matter of fact, there are big similarities between Martin's and Hamlin's Cup careers, as both drivers ran at the top throughout basically their whole career, winning races in almost every season they competed in. Take Hamlin for instance, being a full-time NASCAR driver since 2007, the only winless season he had was in 2018, which begs the question of how? Oh, and 3 of those wins are Daytona 500, so you could say he's decent. Some other strong contenders include the likes of course, Mark Martin, Carl Edwards, Ricky Rudd and Davey Allison, although there is certainly a different pattern with the close championship contenders here when you compare it to F1. Many of these guys were consistently strong over their whole career, and despite having a number of convincing challenges at a championship, always to come up short, whereas many of the F1 contenders on this video only had at most 2 challenges at a championship. Seeing as the form of the team is much more influential in Formula 1 than it is in NASCAR, on top of the fact that manufacturer form is more consistent in NASCAR than it perhaps ever will be in Formula 1, hence the potential for drivers to have more chances at going for championships. And whatever your opinion is on Denny Hamlin, I quite like him, he is at least objectively the most successful NASCAR Cup Series driver without a championship.
Nothing to stop us at this point.
So are these fans motivation for you? There's a lot of boos out there.
Hey, I beat your favorite driver.
And who would that be?
All of them.
So now we have Sir Sterling Moss and Denny Hamlin. But what about 2 wheels? Honestly, this is the first time there could be objectively multiple different answers for motorcycle Grand Prix racing. Here's why. What we now consider Moto 2 and Moto 3, or what used to be 250cc and 125cc, these are also included in the tally of Grand Prix victories. So when we're looking at successful riders that have never won just their Premier Class Championship, you can see how this would become an issue. So do we include all of their Grand Prix wins, or just their Premier Class tally? I think I'd better discuss both here, seeing as there have been so many different motorcycle classes throughout the years. If we're going by overall Grand Prix victories, the answer is quite easily Angel Nieto, ranking 3rd on the all-time list for race wins at 90, only behind Valentino Rossi and Giacomo Agostini, making him the most successful Spanish rider using this metric, yes, ahead of Marc Marquez and Jorge Lorenzo. But he notably always had an affinity for the smaller bikes, winning championships on 50cc and 125cc, with the biggest bike he ever competed on being a 250cc, never even touching the Premier 500cc motorcycles. All in all, he had 13 championships across the categories, or as he would call it, 12 plus 1, given a superstition around 13. But the fact that none of them are on, quote, the big bikes is up for discussion. If we were to talk about the rider with the most Premier Class wins without a championship, it's the one and only Dani Pedrosa. Even though he retired from full-time riding in 2018, he has done a handful of wildcard rides for Red Bull KTM in 2021 and 2023. However, his success came from riding with the Repsol Honda team from 2006 all the way through to 2018, making this the only full-time seat he had in MotoGP. But it was worth it for 31 wins. At only 5'1", he would prove every single doubter wrong that stated Danny wasn't, quote, big enough for the MotoGP bikes. Rookie of the Year honours in his debut MotoGP season, beating 2-time champ Casey Stoner to that title, along with 2 victories and 5th in the 2006 standings, even if he would start to struggle with the bike later in that specific season. With a 125cc championship and 2 250cc championships in consecutive seasons before he got to MotoGP, it's almost more unreal the fact he never got to the top of the standings at the end of the season. 3 second place and 3 third places reinforced the fact he wasn't only one of the fastest on the grid, but consistently fast also. wherein for 12 of those 13 full-time seasons he finished in the top 6, and to be perfectly honest, he's the only one to really stand up to Marc Marquez on the same machinery, or even being remotely close to him, as those that followed Danny got comprehensively annihilated by Marquez in the teammate battle. Although it can be said that injuries have also played a small part in curtailing some of these championship charges, as even if he could compete, a lingering injury will always prevent a rider from pushing to their full potential. So, depending on what exactly you're looking for, Nieto or Pedrosa are the two go-to options for looking at best riders to never win the Premier Class Championship in Grand Prix motorcycle racing. Other contenders include the likes of Max Biaggi, Loris Capirossi, Jorge Martinez, Jim Redman and Anton Mang, all with varying amounts of wins across different sizes of motorcycle. Just for a disclaimer, when talking about IndyCar in this section of the video, this will include kart and champ car also, as they're so similar to one another that they can be included under one umbrella. Even still, this is a pretty foregone conclusion for who the best without championship is. It's Helio Castroneves. Starting his kart/IndyCar career in 1998 after finishing in the Indy Light Series, it's Helio Castroneves. Starting his kart IndyCar career in 1998 after finishing second in the Indy Light Series, he would win the Indy 500 no fewer than 4 times, joining only 3 other drivers who have also completed the feat, along with 4 second-place championship finishes. It's a relatively similar situation to what Dani Pedrosa experienced in MotoGP and what Denny Hamlin experienced in NASCAR, being consistently successful throughout a long career, but never having the season quite good enough to end up being top of the table at the last round, easily topping the wins chart of those that are without a championship at 31 wins, including those Indy 500 victories. As per the other categories though, there are still a few honourable mentions in this series, but none really come close to Helio. Names such as Adrian Fernandez with a 5th, 4th and 2nd place championship finishes. Arie Luyendyk, the only other driver to have multiple Indy 500 wins and no championship alongside, finding himself in the same situation as Castroneves. Bruno Junqueira, who had 3 consecutive runner-up finishes in the championship, and even the likes of Takuma Sato, who has won 2 of the last 7 Indy 500s. But lastly, who can forget Greg Moore? One of the best young talents we've ever seen in the series, seemingly not settling for anything less than a win when out on track, before his life was tragically snatched from him during the race at Fontana in 1999. Obviously for this category there will be some discretion over what series you actually include, somewhat similar to the situation you see when trying to evaluate MotoGP winners, as there could be different contenders basing on what categories you actually include. But either way, I still think that the runaway contender for the best driver in IndyCar to never win a championship is Helio Castroneves. The last category to cover within this video is WRC, and although there are a few contenders for who this could be, some do fall under technicalities. For example, the first 2 listed drivers on the World Champions list are Sandro Minari and Marco Arlen, both of whom won in the driver's standings in 1977 and 78 respectively. But they did so when the drivers' standings were only considered a cup competition, not an outright recognised championship. So officially at least, neither of them are classified as drivers' champions. Even more excruciating for Arlen, in 1986 he would be world champion for 11 days, before a protest from Peugeot annulled the results of the San Remo rally that Arlen was victorious in, giving the championship to Peugeot driver Juha Kankkunen. We also have examples like Jean-Luc Terrier, who was the highest scoring driver in 1973 with Alpine, but of course there were no drivers' standings at all until 1977. So there are multiple drivers throughout WRC history that should be champions, but aren't through championship standing technicalities. Then we have the teammates of Mikko Hirvonen and Jari-Matti Latvala, both of whom would have likely been champions if Sebastian Loeb didn't exist, especially in Hirvonen's case, finishing runner-up to Loeb no fewer than 4 times in 2008, 2009, 2011 and 2012, along with 2 third places. I think the case of Hirvonen is unique in the fact that he was prevented from winning the championship multiple times by a single driver, although both Hirvonen and Latvala both had a habit of dropping the car in rallies that were really crucial. For example, in 2008 as Hirvonen suffered a puncture and a following spin at the penultimate round of the New Zealand rally, with Latvala and other teammate Francois Duval crashing out, all in the same stage, hurting both the Constructors' Championship and Hirvonen's drivers' title chances. Latvala's push for a championship was also thwarted by Loeb, but also the other championship winning Sebastian in Sebastian Ogier. Overall, Latvala would accumulate 3 second-place finishes, basically in tandem with Hirvonen, with neither being able to remain at the top with Ogier and Loeb both in contention. If you even take just Loeb out of this equation, there is probable cause to suggest Latvala and Hirvonen would become multiple-time champions, making for one of the more surreal situations in this video. But if I had to pick one, I'd probably pick Hirvonen, as he has more runner-up spots than Latvala and has demonstrated an extremely long career of consistently winning rallies over a long period. Even considering that drivers that had championships taken away on technicalities, there is an argument for Hirvonen being a more complete driver. But the general consensus still applies to the fact that some of the earlier drivers like Minari, Arlen and Terrier were at the top of the standings come season end, so they could still be considered champions. So, Moss, Hamlin, Nieto/Pedrosa, Castroneves and Hirvonen. Definitely not an exhaustive list, as you can certainly single someone out from basically any championship history who has had a lot of success, but never the ultimate success of winning in their particular motorsport discipline, be it through personal error, circumstance or technicalities in the championship. Don't get me wrong, some of these drivers and riders still rank amongst the best in their category, particularly concerning Stirling Moss, who is still considered by some to be top 3 British drivers of all time, despite the lack of the eventual Formula 1 championship. That begs the question that I think I'll leave this video on. What do you value more at the end of the day when evaluating the calibre of a driver? Total wins or total championships?